How did you almost die? My maths teacher wouldn't open the window in our very stuffy classroom. This induced her asthma attack and she denied me going to the bathroom because she thought I was faking. 3 hours later I came round from an asthma attack, being told I was hanging by a thread. I was on my motorcycle as a 6-car accident happened around me. I came around a curve on the interstate as one car hit the concert barrier and spun out into 4 lanes of traffic. Cars were spinning and rolling around me, and I was barely even dodging. It was like they were dodging me. I pulled off, and as I was coming to a stop a semi came sliding sideways through the whole mess. I hit the throttle again and it smashed into the guardrail a meter or two behind me. It was like seriously like a car chase action movie, except it was all luck and not skill. The throttle punch at the end was the only thing that was on purpose. Was walking along not paying attention like an idiot and stepped out in front of a double-decker bus. The guy behind me grabbed the hood of my sweater and yanked me back, but I was close enough that the bus still smacked into and broke my leading foot. If he hadn't been there, or I wasn't wearing a hoodie, or I was a bit heavier, that would have been my head. My parents didn't believe I was in agonizing pain, so I went back to partying. Next day the pain was back. Stood my ground. Went to the hospital. Doctor finally comes to inform me I have a heart infection. Wouldn't have needed to come in the next day. When I was 8, I very nearly drowned in a swimming pool in France. I was playing on the divider between the deep and shallow areas, which was effectively a row of large boulders, and slipped between 2 of them, getting my leg firmly stuck and badly cut up in the process. I was trapped, hanging upside down in the water and unable to twist my leg at all. The only sign that anything was happening on the surface was the very tip of my foot sticking out, mostly obscured by the boulders, so there wasn't a good chance that anyone would spot anything unusual. I remember looking at all these upside down legs moving in the water and thinking this is how I'm going to die in France. After what felt like an age, I vaguely remember seeing 2 big hairy legs move towards me, and next thing I knew I was forcefully yanked out of the water, with blood dripping into my eyes. The guy carried me to the side and made sure I was alright. No idea what would have happened if he hadn't noticed. I had an accident while moving a big antique mirror by myself at home. It broke and half of it fell onto my neck. It severed my jugular vein and I came within a few minutes of bleeding to death. The paramedic who saved me said I lost about 2 liters of blood, a little over 4 pints, and I was extremely lucky to survive. I was born somewhat premature and my small intestine hadn't fully hollowed out, so I had to be airlifted to another hospital and have that section cut out. Still have a huge scar on my stomach from that. Then in 2nd grade I got chickenpox and ended up having viral encephalitis as a complication. One thing I remember was a woman visiting me in the hospital and I asked her name, and it was the same as my mom's name, so I told her that. Turns out it was my mom and I just didn't recognize her at the time. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital with that. Had a bad cough, so I went to the doctor. He gave me a puff, I can't remember what it was called, and when I went home I fell asleep. Something woke me up from a dead sleep, and when I sat up I started having a hard time breathing. I couldn't talk at all, so I had to write on a pad of paper to tell my boyfriend, now husband, to take me to the hospital. I wrote down my symptoms for the triage nurse and she asked me if I could talk. I shook my head no, but she made me try. I choked out an okay, and she said I could talk and said I could go home since I'm just sick, or I could wait. I waited 4 hours in the waiting room and couldn't get a great breath unless I was sipping water. It was getting frustrating watching people go in before me. I know a lot of them had good reason to be there, but with how few people were actually there was evident she kept me as the lowest priority. When I finally went in I was feeling like death and even the few tests they did were like torture. The nurses and doctors in the actual emergency room were very nice and gentle, but it still was awful at that point. A short time after they were done the tests the doctor came in and said I was septic and I should have come in earlier. Any longer and my organs would have shut down and I would have died. My boyfriend told him I had been in the waiting room for 4 hours and the doctor was pissed. I don't know what happened to the Tridge lady, but I hope she got in some kind of trouble. I know they have to deal with a lot, but her bad day could have been a worse day for me and my family. I was put on an antibiotic pump for a week, but it took a couple weeks to feel like myself. The doctor said I could have easily stayed asleep and died at home, so it was good I woke up. Was in a bad wreck with an 18-wheeler when I was 16. I was on the passenger side in the back seat and the car we were in got crushed when the trailer jackknifed and squished us between the truck and trailer. None of the first responders could believe nobody in our car was killed or even really hurt. Then in 2015 I was pistol whipped in an armed robbery. It felt like the whole side of my head caved in when he hit me. I actually do have a dent in my skull from it. In high school I was waiting at a crowded bus stop when a friend called. I stepped to the side so I could hear him better, and immediately 2 people pulled me away. Turns out I had stepped right in front of a bus that was pulling in. Thanks, guys. LPT don't stand in front of moving buses. I'm a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne Division and had the now rare misfortune of suffering a static line injury. Essentially the cable that opens my chute is attached to the top of my chute and the inside of the plane. Through bad luck I ended up with too much slack and it wrapped my arm. I bounced off of the outside of the plane and my parachute was too twisted to open properly. I ended up with a torn bicep and shattered shoulder blade. All things considered my injuries should have been way worse and I'm lucky to be alive. The ocean versus me at 12. Me and my sister love doing this thing where we would let ourselves get hit by large waves. The feeling of getting pulled in and slammed down as a kid was exhilarating. Well, one day, the ocean was unusually rough. The waves were gigantic and there were riptides. My dad told us we can't go in the ocean, but the waves were so huge, we had to give it a try. We snuck off, sat in front of our impending doom. This 8-10 foot wave starts coming in, takes all the water with it. When it began to crest, I got the "oh shit, this is going to hurt" feeling, but at this point it was too far to go back. It comes and picks me and my sister, slams me face first on the beach, scratches the duck out of my face and arms on the beach shells. Most waves when they crash, there is very little water left on the beach. Yet, this one was so huge, it left a ton. Enough that we were both strong swimmers. But, the current still could pull us back into the next one. It did this 2-3 times, until we were both either concussed or tired enough that we couldn't fight back. The last one pulled us deep in the ocean. We tried to swim toward the beach, but to no avail. We kept going further and further, but an old man, probably in his 60s, spotted us. He swam up to us, but he only grabbed my sister, begun to trek back to the beach. So, I'm there, 12, probably concussed, bleeding, very tried, just looking at the shoreline. It gets so far, I can barely see the shoreline. Alone. I'm like, okay, LOL. Duck, this is how I die. Remember pondering my death. But I was too tired to do anything but just stay afloat. After what seemed like an eternity, the old man swims back and finds me, takes me to shore. Besides the ass beating I got from my dad, I also was traumatized by the ocean. I probably didn't go back in it for like 4 years. Even today, I'll go, but it's just uneasy feelings and definitely not going deeper than I can stand. A big plane hit the building I was in. 9/11. Yep. South Tower. 40 floors below the plane. At my high school, we recently had a lockdown. I was sitting down in a class signing a yearbook during lunch, and then a bunch of kids start running down the hall. When I saw that, I assumed all of them were following a fight. Course students always flock over to see fights. Then a bunch of them start rushing into our class. Right when kids were trying their best to get into our class and my teacher went outside trying to get more kids into his class. It felt more real. He told all of us to sit down immediately. We sat down. Lights off. Blinds closed. Doors locked for a solid hour and a half. That was the most tense hour of my life. We had no clue what was going on. During the lockdown we found out that the principal sent out a blast message to teachers saying that a person on campus has a duffel bag with an AR-15 and tear gas grenades. A bunch of students were saying that a shooter was on campus. It was fairly silent in our room, except at one point multiple people started crying saying that they didn't want to die, which definitely affected everyone in the room. Then after the hour and a half we hear keys opening our door. 4 fully armed SWAT members were right outside our door and then told us that they were just sweeping classrooms throughout the hall. After all of that, we found out that someone called our principal threatening to shoot the school, so he called for an immediate lockdown. After talking to other people, the vibes in other rooms were way different. In the gym, they just kept playing volleyball. In our NPR, they just sat on chairs and talked. In the library, they just kept on talking. But in our classroom, it felt like a crazy situation was going on. A lot of kids in my room were telling me that they sent goodbye texts to their family. Consider subscribing if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more of Reddit Universe.